Today I'm joined by Bruce Pollock, another industry veteran, currently VP of Strategic Growth within Night Systems, has worked with West Interactive, has been in this industry for some 30 years, I think. Conversation with Bruce covering everything from analysis paralysis that he's seeing within the industry and customers at the moment, but how to move forward, particularly with Gen AI, the importance of analytics, the importance of insights and acting on those analytics, and his view about the rebirth of outbound and how that's going to help drive customer service, particularly in the months and years ahead. Again, really enjoyable chat with Bruce. Hopefully you enjoy this podcast. Good morning, Bruce Pollock. Mr.
Oliver, how have you been, my friend?
I'm good. You look very, how should I put this? Next generation AI with your wonderful. Well, you look bald as well. So thankfully, most of our listeners are on the likes of Spotify, so they can't see either of us, Bruce. But for those of our guests who tune into YouTube and want to see Bruce Pollock and Oliver Lennon in all their hairy glory, you can sign in. But
I'm hoping that AI can help me address that baldness, but it hasn't managed to do that quite yet. Although, according to Gardner, that can probably happen in the next 10 years.
I don't know, Bruce. I wouldn't hold out hope to be honest. How are you? You're keeping well. We've known, just for, I guess, background. I'm trying to remember when it was, but we met, and I'm sure it's somewhere 15, 20 years ago. It might have been in a project with eBay, was it?
Yeah, that's right. It was a professional services initiative we were doing. You're right, across the pond, and that's where we first met. And I'm delighted that we've been able to we were able to create and keep our friendship and relationship, and very much look forward to connecting again today.
So, and I guess the only reason I'm bringing that up is like myself, but you certainly been through this industry, and I say this industry, the customer experience, CX, call it what you will, with many different acronyms that are put onto it. You've seen it through the good days, the bad days, the tech evolution. So I'm interested to get a lot of your perspective. What we cover a lot in the podcast is, yes, not so much historical, but looking, I suppose, what do we learn from the past, where the industry's going, where the tech's going, and stuff that's quite often not in the tech, which is usually as important as the tech itself. So you want to give?
You forgot to add the ugly to the good and the bad, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Don't ever forget, because there's always some of that in our business too.
I'm not sure I ever partook in any of that.
Yeah. Oh no, more like ugly, meaning failed deployments of otherwise promising technology that didn't work. It didn't work.
Hands up. Yes, we probably did oversell the odd bit and piece here, and we probably didn't deliver all the benefits that we promised.
Never.
I often remember back, I think it was 2009 or 2008, I think it was Speech Tech. Well, if you remember Speech Tech back in the day when they used to run it in New York City, talking about the evolution of voice rec and scan stuff and speech work. So if you remember the blue and the red and the merger. But anyway, at that stage, voice recognition technology is changing the world. And I've used this opening sometimes in other podcasts, but it feels like we're kind of at that again, are we, with generative AI? And if I do look back and think about where we've come in the past, whatever that period of time was, 15, 16, 17 years, yes, voice recognition technology and, voice biometrics, all of those things absolutely have helped. I wouldn't say they revolutionized the industry. Do you think are we in another one of these hype cycles with Gen AI? And is that will you and I be sitting on a podcast? Not I, in 15 years' time, looking back, talking about Gen AI?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think you're absolutely right. In those days, 10, 15, even 20 years ago, speech recognition, for example, the example you used, had a lot of promise, and there was a lot of hype around it. And as you know as well as I do, it took probably 10 to 15, maybe even 20 years before the technology actually matured enough to be able to be used in a customer service context. I'll never forget, in our startup company, we had a startup in cloud-based, or that was called hosted, but cloud-based speech recognition. the year 2000, 1999, 2000, 2001, and using speech recognition. And of course, in those early days, on the customer side, companies were kind of wondering, number one, what the technology was or is, and number two, whether it would work for them or not. And indeed, it did work on a limited basis, but it was never able to kind of achieve its full promise. And part of it wasn't so much, I don't think, limitations around technology. Sometimes what happens is both on the buy side and the sell side, people tend to overestimate what a technology can do, particularly in the early stages, and that causes upsets and failed deployments. And that happened then. And of course, fast forwarding to now, there's a lot of fantastic, AI activity going on in customer service, as you know, Oliver, and yet we find ourselves at a similar spot, I think, where yes, there are some great deployments and so on and so forth, but there are also a vast number of failures early in this cycle. In fact, I was reading just the other day that I think Gartner was quoted as saying about 30%. I think it's actually going to be higher, but their claim was 30% of all AI initiatives or trials, et cetera, would basically fail in 2025. I think it's going to be more than that. But it's not atypical of we're in the early stage of this cycle, and there's experimentation going on, which is all good. But it seems like sometimes you wonder if we actually really learned lessons from the past. For example, what would customers be interested in using? What could or would they use? And can a vendor or a company build something that actually is useful to a customer to achieve their goal and their task? And I think that's the challenge and the opportunity going forward.
Yeah, no, I think we're at that classical technology solution, looking for a problem in part of it, but there's definitely lots of problems to be solved if we can apply the technology correctly. I was looking back on one of your, I'm going to pull you up on this and take you out of the blue on this one. There was a LinkedIn post you wrote to 2020, at the end of 2022, I think it was. No, the end of 2021, your thoughts for 2022. You had 22 thoughts for 22. 22 was the year of Gen AI at the end of the start. You didn't mention Gen AI in that future-looking podcast or LinkedIn post. And I'm not being. If you had been able to forecast it then, I think you would have been quite a happy man and maybe quite a rich man. But looking through some of those things that you did actually talk about, and this probably resonates quite well. A lot of us around people about digital migrations, and I'm sure you see it as well. And give you a chance to talk about your background before we go too far. But when you're in large organizations, large enterprises, and you're working with them, the technology is usually the easier bit of the solution. It's all the other pieces around it where projects either succeed or fail. The change management, the approach to incorporating the much talked about omni-channel, whatever that means, which is another debate in itself. So I don't know, is that what you see within larger organizations trying to deliver CX, and where is that sort of the technology, and what are all the other bits that are required around the technology?
Yeah, that's a really good point and good question. I think you hit the nail on the head. Look, I think the statement that we could have made, 25 years ago, that people management and change management and process management were important then, and they're just as important now. And I think you're absolutely right. Change management is one of those things that tends to be overlooked in organizations, and because it's overlooked, that's one of the key drivers, I think, behind the failure of some of these initiatives. Who is informed, who is communicated with, and who is prepared. Are the agents themselves, for example? Do they know what the new environment will be in their, either at home or in their contact center, or whatever it might be, what that new technology is and how it's going to impact their jobs? So I think, the more the technology advances, that's fantastic, but we always need to remember the whole issue and task around change management. In my view, that's a vastly underappreciated concept, and is probably one of the main causes of failed technology projects. When that happens, is there's no communication, and there's no change management scenario in place, and therefore they fail. And you've also got, I think, whenever change comes along, there's always also there's a segment of the audience out there, whether it's on the business side or IT side or whatever, who resist change and who fear change. And I think that also can impede some progress as well in terms of new initiatives, whether it's AI or otherwise. And it's natural for some of us to be concerned about change, but most of the time we're concerned about it because we don't know what lies ahead. And typically in many companies, there's not as much communication as there can or should be around, what the plan is, what are we doing, why are we doing it, etc. So people get a bit nervous about it, and that serves as a little bit of a kind of slowing down driver, I guess, if you will, right? Sort of impedes some progress. But we all get over that, and whether it's internal IT teams, business teams, get over that and embrace change as we see progress and we see successful, deployments of new technologies, and then we progress accordingly.
And I mean, you're seeing a lot of these. So you're a VP within NICE Systems. You've been there for maybe 3 or 4 years, I think.
Yeah.
And you're seeing up close a lot of larger organizations, how they're addressing the problems they're facing. Again, without not asking specifically to specific projects, but what are the sort of things that you see from where your vantage point, which is a very good vantage point, that organizations are, so how we all talk about CX and the value it can deliver. So how are they approaching these projects? What are the things that they're thinking about? What are the pitfalls they're trying to avoid? And what are you seeing in that space?
Yeah, for sure. Good question. Well, for starters, certainly these days, a lot of, whether they're big, small, or in between, a lot of companies, and this is no secret, are kind of looking or considering AI and how AI can help them, not only improve their business operations, but also improve their customer service. And so there's, active research and consideration going, a lot of mind share around it, which is, I think, a good thing. At the same time, I think, we always, when we're talking with clients or whatever it is, we always try to encourage the thought process of where you're at today, and before we jump too far ahead to talk about technology and AI, we will often encourage customers to think about where are you at, where are you at today, and where are your customers at today? How are you doing in terms of your service today? And what do your customers think of you in that regard, and what kind of modes of technology can they contact you with? How is that working? So basically trying to make sure that while yes, want to embrace an exciting technology, to never forget that we're generally in the business of customer experience, customer service, and we need to always go back to that bedrock of what are the customer views, what are their capabilities and interests, how are they communicating with the company today. So certainly encouraging a lot of that. And then secondly is, before jumping too far into applications, it's good for companies to always think, okay, here's what the technology can do, but perhaps more importantly, what do we need it to do and want it to do? And then around that, and a lot of what I focus on is ROI, is what is the payback, whether it be improved service, improved agent experience, or better financial ROI for the company? What is the payback around this specific opportunities? I think a lot of companies tend to still view everything as just one big swath of opportunity, and it's harder and more work to actually boil it down to, okay, where would we start and why, and where would we go next and why? And oftentimes that's an ROI type calculation, right? Which is, okay, what's the best place to start to get some quick wins? Which is, I think, a really good way to target something that's pretty straightforward and easy to do, to try to get a quick win, not just to get everybody on board for the next thought, but also just to make sure that things are actually working as we expect, and then build from there. So I think business cases, why are we doing this? What's the ROI? And then behind the specific applications. And then, of course, once you've got a few of those running, we often encourage folks, take a look at those. How are they doing? Manage those actively, and then take a look at, okay, what are the next steps? So kind of it's the crawl, walk, run sort of thing. It sounds trite, but it's true, rather than trying to pull off some kind of a big bang approach, which inevitably fails. I think, And so that's just kind of a methodology, kind of starting with the customer, then kind of figuring out where they're at and the kind of maturity curve today and where their customers, and then kind of engaging and moving from there is kind of the general approach. And I think that while AI is exciting, it can also kind of be distracting in a sense. It can seem to create all these kinds of projects and initiatives with really no goal and no objective, which is if you don't have a goal, then it's going to be difficult to achieve anything, and that causes a few failures. But we continue to move on and progress, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you think well, not the vendor community, but maybe we've been part of this, but customer organizations have lost sight of that. Let's put the ROI, let's put a why are we doing this in place, particularly more recently with the Gen AI and that sort of rush. I mean, what I've kind of seen, it's the sort of diktats or mandates coming from, senior leadership or board level to say we need to be using Gen AI without actually understanding why do we want to use it? What are we trying to achieve?
Yeah. How do we spell that? And how do we? How can we spell? No, you're absolutely right. I think that's still a challenge, and those initiatives, as you say, Oliver, come from the senior levels of companies saying, which on the one hand is a good thing because it's being encouraged. On the other hand, it can cause a lot of kind of ill-thought decisions to be made about where can we and where should we be applying, AI. And I think the other challenge here is that AI itself, and let's just say generative AI per se, or is, while it's powerful, in the context of customer service or customer experience, it kind of lacks, if you will, some of the guts that are required for success. And kind of what I mean by that is, I'll never forget years ago when I was managing one of our speech teams, natural language, big speech, natural language initiatives at West Corporation. And we had an interesting inquiry from a major software company who said that they had something, similar to, we didn't call it Gen AI then, but basically something similar to that. But what they actually were interested in talking with us about is caller intents and customer intents and reasons for people inquiring with companies, because without that, their, whatever you might want to call it, chatbot was not going to work because while they had the AI, they didn't have any understanding of vertical markets or customer intents. And I think that's where we're at today. Is so many companies, as they look at Gen AI, they haven't yet realized, and unfortunately some of them may learn the hard way, but haven't yet realized that what's required to be successful is also the integration and the layering in of all of these and understanding of all these customer intents by vertical market. Because without those, you've got nothing. All you have is another dumb chatbot. I'll never forget, I was at a conference a few years ago, and a senior director from one of the major airlines in the US was talking about a chatbot they launched on their website. And, IT or somebody who put the chatbot up, and people were asking him questions afterwards. How successful was it and stuff like that? He said, well, honestly, it was an abysmal failure. And the audience was quizzing as to why that was the case. And he said, well, we put this chatbot up without realizing it actually needs to have some understanding of some customer intent initially. If they ought to have some context, you're right. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to do anything helpful for customers. And so he said, we learned the hard way. We actually took the bot down, and it took us some time before we actually put it back up because we were rookies and we made a huge mistake. And that mistake is still being made today by some companies out there. They forget that they need some customer intent and some context to be successful.
Yeah, and excuse me, and that underlying, not only the intent, but the underlying data, the knowledge of the organization from the knowledge base or CRM, and how that is surfaced and used within a bot, whether that's voice or chat. And
exactly.
There's a pretty recent one from another large airline based north of the United States.
That's right. I think I've heard of that airline in the country north of where I'm at right now. That's right.
who I don't know. I'm not going to repeat it, but it seemed like a pretty dumb thing. They were suggesting that they had no control over what the bot was doing when you're going, but this bot is based on your data and your processes. So therefore, I don't know. So I think
Yeah.
you're right. That sort of and while Gen AI and ChatGPT and Gemini or pick your flavor, whatever you want, have been great to actually open up the experience and yes, get that up into a board level or a senior level to say, right, we need to be using this technology. You still have a lot of the nuts and bolts, whether that's integration, whether that's data, whether that's proper process flows. And I think again, if you're seeing this, but I think after that initial avalanche of let's pilot for the first 6 to 12 months, organizations are now stepping back and going, okay, there is value here, but let's figure out how we can extract the value based on whatever our products, our services, our infrastructure, our, because again, I've used the term, sometimes it's like putting, you Americans mightn't understand this, but lipstick on a pig. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Don't forget, I was born in Canada, so I was born in Canada, so I remember that. Yeah,
it
that's
still
right.
doesn't make pigs look pretty, but so there's a certain amount of that happening.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, look, we're probably right now in regard to with AI, kind of know what Gartner would call the trough of disillusionment, right? We kind of went through that, as you've illustrated well, kind of this hype where everybody was kind of frothing to get something going. And I think then companies went off and did which we've talked about, generally not a great idea, which is go off and kind of, shoot first and think later, around some of these deployments. And there've been some failures, but I think we're now kind of coming to the point where we're near that trough of disillusion, where people are saying, okay, we've tried a few things. Those didn't work, but we know why. And now let's proceed in a more methodological fashion. Let's create a goal and an objective. Let's do a change management initiative around it, right? Let's make sure we've got customer caller intents as part of our AI initiative. Let's make sure that we've got, to your point, you brought up that all the data is knitted together so that we can make a meaningful, beneficial transaction for a customer, rather than just picking up a piece of data and saying, well, I can't do anything with that, so I'll transfer you to an agent or whatever. I think we see a lot of successful deployments underway now, where I think the technology and the capabilities are beginning to come to fruition, and successes are continuing to grow out there. And I think as you look forward over the next number of years, I think AI is going to have a massive impact on the industry. What I mean by that is, you and I know that usually what happens with technologies like this is it takes a while for the technology to mature. It takes a while for the adoption curve to kind of develop. And then at some point in time, it hits a point of inflection where it just takes off. And I think that we're not quite there to what Gartner might call slope of enlightenment, but we're getting there. And I think when it does, the impact will be dramatic. And I think what's driving a lot of it is, and it's probably global, certainly in the US, and I would imagine in UK and Europe and other parts of the world, there's a labor shortage in contact centers. It's a challenge to get and keep great agents. Historically, those jobs have not necessarily been the kind of job that people have sought as their first opportunity. So going forward, for companies who can't recruit enough people and they're struggling, they've got to have a solution that allows them to communicate more effectively with their customers. And for that reason, as well as kind of on the flip side, all of this really positive technology development and successful deployments, I think you're going to find, looking ahead 5 years from now, a massive number of deployments, some of which I think will be very exciting in nature, both inbound and I think outbound as well. And we often sort of, don't think as much about outbound. I'll give you an example. In my former life at West Corporation, there was 1 year there where we did about 1 billion outbound notifications to customers, 1 billion. And that was, a decade ago, 8 or 10 years ago. And I always remember thinking, gosh, number one, that's a lot of transactions. And number two, there's got to be a future there in outbound. So I think that that's another, kind of area we're going to see massive growth in. And what I mean by that is sort of more smart outbound stuff, like not just, hey, Oliver, pay, here's a reminder, pay bill pay or whatever it is.
Yeah.
These days, most of us have automatic bill pay anyway, but not just a simple one-way reminder, but rather an outbound message with some engagement opportunity for you to engage back. Maybe it's something like, hey, Oliver, from your insurance company, we know it's renewal time. We've looked at your current provider, and we might be able to provide, a better price, better overall package. Are you interested? You might say, sure. It might reply back, hey, here's some options. Sure. Like more of a dynamic kind of relationship rather than just one way. Interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was gonna, when you talked about it, I would say most people in the industry will naturally think about that dumb fire and forget, either, classical outbound dialer from a voice perspective, or, as you say, reminders or base notifications where there's no real interaction, to fire and forget. And I think if you can, but this kind of then comes down to me what proper omni-channel could start to look like. Because again, the stats are out there. Something like 80% of interactions start on a web, whether that's a Google search or Bing search or going to your website or whatever. And then you might have to escalate to voice. You might complete the transaction. You might then, through the life cycle of that engagement, this is where you can start to bring in other channels, be that, maybe a WhatsApp or a social channel or an SMS, to then help, again, I use WhatsApp a bit more with some service providers that I'm doing now, but I even think how they implement the technology, it's not joined up. I'm not going to name them, but there's one broadband provider in the UK who I've used. And you can go onto their website, you can start a chat. One of the things that pop up is, well, why don't you connect to us on WhatsApp? And then, brilliant, this works for me because I don't want to be sitting on a chat the whole time. But what they've done, so I've gone through the web chat, did my ID and my identification verification, who I was, then pinged me up the link to go to WhatsApp, jumped onto WhatsApp. First thing I have to do is re-verify. Okay, that's not great. Okay, so I re-verified, went through, and then there was some automation, then eventually connected to the agent, and that was fine, back and forth a little bit. Something, I was in the office, was working at the time, something popped up, in the office, started chatting to someone else. But 15 minutes later, went back to my WhatsApp to continue my conversation, but it had timed out. So I had to restart.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, like,
yes, right.
Here's
the agent has dropped you, and they're like, okay, see you later, Oliver. I'm on to my next call because I've got metrics to make, and you're getting in the way of my metrics.
Correct. And this was me, like, here's some great pieces of technology that have been, I use the word abused. I mean that in the sense of misuse rather than abuse, that I say. So those things can be really frustrating from an experience perspective, but, technically all of this can be joined up together. And it's back to what we were saying earlier, quite often is the change process or the metrics that we're measuring in the contact center, as in agent handle time, number of interactions dealt with, which sometimes are the wrong metric.
Yeah, I think the other issue too is that, again, that's an example of, as companies or as human beings, sometimes we act before we think. We don't think about, okay, in that experience you just cited, like, okay, if the company wants somebody to be using WhatsApp, what should that experience look like? And what should be the number of WhatsApp chats and agents handling, for example. Maybe it's probably not 5 or 8, which is what companies tend to, probably far less than that. That gets back to the whole, and this very, very well, this topic around user experience, which sounds trite, but it's true. We there's a tendency in all this technology development to kind of forget that, oh yeah, there's a user, and we need to kind of make that experience an optimum one. And we need to test that, and we need to ensure that that interaction is easy and seamless for the customer. And then we also need to be analyzing how those are going and improve those. And I think analytics generally is something that I've seen a continued focus on and growth in the entire marketplace, if you will. And among enterprises is there's some really good developments around, okay, gosh, we've got all this data. How can we, integrate that data and make constructive, valuable use of that data to improve the customer experience? We certainly see a lot of companies, looking to leverage analytics in that regard. And I think that's still a sort of underappreciated sort of practice, if you will, even within inside enterprises, which is, and part of the challenge, of course, as you know very well, is you got historically all these premise-based, disintegrated, kind of applications in particular, which lead to very disjointed customer experiences. And even if you had somebody looking at that, it would take you days to try to figure out what's going on, even in one or two call paths, because you're going to 3 or 4 different systems. With the evolution of the cloud and kind of better analytics software, I think there's a tremendous amount of improvement there and a lot of promise. And I think the companies going forward absolutely need to be full on pedal to the metal on not just looking at AI and how it can help, but analytics is huge as well, because without analytics, your AI is inevitably going to fail.
Yeah, and I think when you talk to people about analytics, and maybe this is part of the vendor community issue as well, it tends to be dashboards and showing quote unquote pretty pictures. And yes, you need to visualize the data in some ways, but to me, you're right. There's a huge amount of data and interaction data, agent-based data that should be and could be mined. Now, maybe organizations are. I'm certainly not seeing it anywhere near the degree that it should be being done. And maybe you're seeing it more than I am, but I absolutely think there's a massive opportunity there. And then the analytics is great in terms of, to me, it's the first step. It's how you understand what's happening. The second stage then is, can you act on that data? Can you then do something about it? And as you mentioned, a lot, and I don't know what the stats are, but there's still a significant number of organizations, both mid-size and large, who are a mixture of on-prem, maybe some cloud, of disparate systems. So therefore, to get the data in the first place part, even to get the data through the analytics, it's nigh on impossible then to change something. Because if you can't change something as a result of the data, then
what the heck is it for? No, you're absolutely right. You make a really good point, which is that there are a lot of companies, as we say, data rich but insight poor, right? I mean, they got a bunch of data lying around. Even if it is integrated, they got a bunch of data there, but there's really no insights generated from that, either through AI or through humans. And increasingly, AI is able to provide insight and recommendations on actions in context there. For example, for supervisors, we've got a product that allows, and nice, we have a product that allows, a supervisor to see how things are going today, real time, and some recommendations on here's what you might want to look at. You're getting a lot of calls about this. These agents are performing well. These aren't. So kind of looking at all that data, synthesizing it, and creating meaning out of it that's actionable. And I think, maybe that's where we're going in the industry, is because it's been such a challenge for, if you will, humans to kind of to manually go and do that this is a fantastic application for AI. We can gather all that stuff up, create some insights and some recommendations, because as you say, there's so many companies out there with a lot of data, but even if it is connected, from A to B to C, there may be nothing done with it. I'll never forget, we did some work when I was at West Corporation for a client who literally collected probably just millions and millions of pieces of kind of customer data here, there, and everywhere, wanted many different kinds of reporting, more than anyone could ever digest. And I'll never forget one time we had asked them, because it was eating up quite a bit of server space and stuff like that. We asked them of the thousands and thousands of reports they literally were generating, how many they actually, looked at or relied on. And the number was even smaller than I thought. It was between 5 and 10. When literally when they had hundreds of thousands, I thought, okay, it's probably maybe 50 of these reports they look at. So again, bottom line is, lots of data out there, but it's so important to make something of that. And back to one of the things we've talked about, which is, what data are we chasing? Why are we chasing that data? And what the heck are we going to do with it, right? As you've pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, I know another large organization who are collecting that much data in the reports. It takes them 3 days in batch processing to get the data into some sort of warehouse and then produce some sort of output. And by that time, the data is not parts of the data is useless. We don't know why we've had a spike here, because I don't know. We'll tell you in 3 days. So it's absolutely back to that point. What are you collecting and why are you collecting it? And it's so often you're collecting so much that your other processes, whether it's the data warehousing or APIs that push the data, are just not up to speed because they're on-prem or whatever. So there's so many people trying to do things that sometimes you often say, well, just pick some of your basic pieces first of all, and the ROI on that alone will give you a huge return.
Immense return. You're right, and it's incredible that there's still these challenges out there today. One of my managers in previous years used to say something, I think, which was very true and point, which was, before you try to kind of do a whole bunch of innovation things, to do the routine things routinely first, right? Which is you got to be able to execute on the routine things first, and then, i.e., manage your data and so on and so forth, like out of that before you start. And I think that's a challenge companies face today. They're all excited about AI and stuff like that, which is important, and yet they're at like 0.0 on the maturity curve, and so they're not doing even the routine things routinely, and therefore. And then they launch into a bunch of these initiatives. And of course, sometimes, unfortunately, they're not successful, because they haven't got the basics covered off.
Yeah. Well, and I sometimes get brought in to look at, reviews of CX, whatever. And some of the first questions I will ask, have you ever listened to your IVR lately?
Yeah.
Have you ever visited your website? Because I could probably give you, within 10 minutes, 5 things you could do that would improve the experience rapidly by even listening to the verbiage on your IVR or how long it takes. And, this doesn't involve Gen AI, but quite often people don't want to listen to that because it's not sexy enough or it's not innovative enough.
Right. Let me guess. The answer was no. They've never go to their own website. They never call their own system, and they don't probably have a faint clue about the customer interactions in IVR or whatever it is, because they've never done that, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I mean, it's but like, going forward, I think just back, around AI is we kind of continue on that thread. I think that the pace of change is going to continue to be very quick in AI. And I think companies, one thing that I think is happening out there is that there's a little bit of analysis paralysis. There are some companies that are absolutely embracing it. They're taking off. They're using it. They're rightfully so. They are experimenting with it, contained experiments. They're finding things that work as successful, and they're evolving. Others are I think there's a few companies out there you see that are kind of stuck a little bit in analysis paralysis. They're looking for something perfect to pop out of a box that's going to happen. And that's just not real life in this industry. And for companies, they need to, Gartner coined this term, I think it was type A and type B sort of technology stuff. Type A was whatever they called it. Type 1 actually was. So type 1 was got to have technology to keep the lights on, right? KTL, keep the lights on, continue with a group who's doing on that. But type B, is they also need to have people inside their company who are spend 100% of every day on forward-looking innovation and things that aren't related to current operations or deployment, but rather forward-looking technology and experimenting with that. And that's what I think that's the real opportunity for companies to make sure they've got those two, type A and type B, or 1 and 2 types. And then they've got groups not only looking after the current scenarios and operations, but also spending this quality time on what can we do with AI.
And do you think, are you still seeing that analysis paralysis, as you call it, happening, or is it
I think it's corporate bureaucracy. It's bureaucracy inside of companies. It's decision-making processes that are probably from like the 1980s or 90s. It's multiple layers of approval processes and people who, everyone's well-meaning, but I think the challenge, the opportunity, I guess put it this way, the opportunity companies have is to move more fluidly and more quickly in this marketplace. And by the way, you and I know this, and so does your audience, that technology, the pace of change continues to grow rapidly. Yeah. And yet companies, in some cases, their own decision-making internally is still labyrinthine and very slow. Those will be the companies that will struggle significantly in the next 5 to 10 years because their decision-making is bureaucratic and slow, and because the executives lack the art of decision-making in complex, unpredictable circumstances, right? Yeah. How many executives are out there who want a perfect prediction or answer to something they're pursuing? Good luck. Decision-making in times of uncertainty is where we're at now. And executives need to be proactive and make decisions in this uncertain environment if they're going to move forward successfully. Analysis paralysis they won't survive.
Yeah, and I think that's the nail on the head, so to speak. This uncertain environment, things are you see it, I'm sure, every week, changing in the AI space, the Gen AI space specifically. How much of it is true, but certainly there's a lot of hype out there coming again, and I blame myself and us as vendors for that. We're promoting the product for this, that, the other. So there is quite a lot of fear, as in, will this work? Could I do it? Should I do it? And I think until that maybe settles, and it is starting to settle, no doubt, and until we start to see real use cases with real business value coming to fruition and people talking about it, then there still will be a little bit of that anxiety within the market.
And that's where I think proof of concepts and things like that can come in really useful, right? Which is, okay, if we're not sure what this can do, let's do a 3-month trial, or a 6-month trial with a vendor on a specific technology. Let's see how that technology really works in a real environment, and let's see the results. And frankly, from a kind of enterprise side, challenging vendors in this space we call broadly, let's say, our customer experience, challenging these vendors. Look, okay, you all say you can do something, then take the next 6 months or 3 months. Let's do some trials and let's see who can actually execute compared to who's going to struggle. And I think that's something that everyone on the buy side needs to be doing right now. Yeah. Challenge your vendors, do some real projects, and then you can separate the wheat from the chaff, right?
Yeah, and I think I do see some vendors some enterprise customers starting to do that. If I'm going back to we talked at the outset, or I talked about your LinkedIn post in 2021, I think it was, you're 22 for 22. If I were to ask if you're to write another post at the end of this year, which you might well do, and I look forward to it, what's your 25 for 25? Now, don't give me 25, maybe pick 2 or 3 for 25. What do you see? And don't let me just have the 25. What do you see in the next year, 2 year that's sort of going to start to change the needle a little bit? What should we look out for? Good
question. I think in this fast-moving environment, there are a few things I think absolutely that I think are true today and will be part. One of them is, I think there's going to be among customer experience leaders, there is going to be some more significant investment around improving the agent experience, helping agents to become better trained, because there's a great concern out there that attrition is still a very, very big challenge. So I think you're going to see, and the other reason why you're going to see a focus on that is because as AI starts to take a lot of the simple transactions away, and even the moderately, difficult transactions, what agents are going to be left with is the difficult problem-solving interactions, and they're going to need to upskill and be more, better trained. And I think you're going to see a lot of emphasis there. I think you're going to see, kind of goes without saying, a lot more investment around AI. You'll see all kinds of failures, but probably more importantly, some tremendous successes. And I think we'll see, and I think it's going to surprise us because the technology can do and is capable of doing, I think, even more than we think it can. So I think there'll be some very positive if you will, kind of upside surprises on the capabilities of the technology. I think you'll see a double and tripling down on analytics among industry leaders, meaning CX companies deploying more analytics and finding, new insights around there that are actionable. I think you're going to see some companies continue to, those that are not being proactive around AI, that are not using some of the approaches we've talked about today, are going to crumble. They're going to see their customer experience continue to erode because they're not doing anything proactive. They're engaged with analysis paralysis. Their bureaucratic decision making and their challenges internally will lead them to struggle to even embrace at a moderate level technology. And I think we've seen COVID and during COVID and post COVID some really poor customer experiences that are going to continue to be bad. So I think you're going to see a big separation, a gap, if you will, of that's going to be probably bigger than ever before. On the one hand, companies investing in CX, investing in AI, investing in the customer experience, investing in their agents, investing in analytics. And on the other side, there's going to be a bunch of folks in the bleachers, in the stands, wishing or thinking they could do that kind of thing, but it's not going to happen successfully. And I think that those companies will fail in time, not overnight, but because they're not able to provide any kind of great customer experience. You'll see also, I think, some tremendous growth in outbound, as we've talked about, as companies look to proactively engage customers as a way not only to kind of prevent that inbound call, but to provide a better overall customer experience. And I think those are some of the main themes. And who knows what lies ahead. It's an exciting time. And I think, but to conclude, I think companies who are sitting around and belly gazing and pontificating about whether they should do something in this world are going to have to put pedal to the metal. Otherwise, they're going to significantly struggle in their markets overall, undoubtedly.
Sure, isn't that the age-old adage for any company in any industry, regardless of the technology?
Yep.
If you're not prepared to try something, take some risk, albeit controlled, then you're going to be a laggard.
Yeah, and that's more true than ever. And so I think companies need to be pedal on the metal of this stuff because of the pace of change is so much faster all over than it was. I think you'd agree with this, than it was 5 or 10 years ago, or than it was even 2 years ago.
Yeah, it is. Listen, Bruce, I've used up a lot of your time this morning, but it's been, as always, great to catch up and talk about the old times and look forward to the new times.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to that 25 for 25 post coming up, and I'll
start the homework on it right away. Yeah,
I'll mark your homework then some way mid through 2025 and get on another podcast with you, Bruce.
Oliver, thanks very much. Always a pleasure, and have a wonderful afternoon and evening.
You too. Thank you, Bruce. Take care.